Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm SAW1204, and as always, I'm joined by LDH1006. How are you doing? You okay, LDH?
I'm feeling very mellow.
Yeah.
I'm on the right, just the right amount of medication.
You just
How
nicely
about you?
Yeah, I'm feeling nicely balanced is how I'm doing. I think I've had all emotion and ability to rebel taken from me. I think that's how I'm feeling. So ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about a George Lucas film and his first science fiction film, let's put it that way. We're going to be talking about THX1138, which obviously was eventually used as the name for his sound company, which is probably where everyone will have seen THX a number of times and probably never known where it's come from, because this film is not widely distributed and not widely known, really. It's obviously been surpassed by Star Wars and everything else, and we shall see whether that's rightfully so. But 1971, THX 1138. So Julian, what are your first thoughts on
For some reason, the THX 1138 action figures didn't take off. The
bold
the
Robert
robot
Duvall figures were never that popular?
yeah, right. The the robots with the sort of silver faces were not as successful as the stormtroopers.
Yes. Yeah. Can I just point out, there's something else I want to point out early on. And in fact, there's two things we need to sort of highlight early on. The first one is we have done lots and lots of films, and we've covered lots of actors a number of times, like, around the same period, like we did Vanilla Sky and Minority Report, but on two different seasons, right? So we've had Tom Cruise multiple times. We've done a couple of others that popped up. This is the first time that we have had an actor go from episode to episode in a consecutive order. This was by accident, and we've never had it before. And the fact it's Donald Pleasance is kind of bizarre.
Oh, I forgot. Was he in
Fantastic Voyage? He was the he was the crazy professor that sort of that went nuts at the end, and he's he's Sen in this film. So Donald Pleasance of all people ends up getting sort of like the golden headphones. So that's the first point, which I thought I'd just point out. The second point is, and this is something we will address as we go through, the version of the film that Julian and I both watched for this is what we shall refer to, I suppose, as the special editions. I didn't know this existed. I just watched the version that was was available to me on streaming, and within minutes I was like, wow, this was really impressive sort of upgrade they've done for to the picture, and the effects were good for 71. No, they weren't the 1971 effects. There was actually George Lucas went back and special edition this with an awful lot of CGI, cleaned up shots, added backgrounds, so on and so forth. So what we watched is the director's upgrade. I mean, it's not really a director's cut. The type, he hasn't changed. He hasn't changed new scenes or added new dialogue. He's just added special effects. So that is worth noting, because it does kind of change parts of the film. But
yeah. I mean, I think it makes the film a little more tolerable, frankly.
Yes.
I mean, this was a movie, I've never seen this before. This was a movie that I've known about my whole life, right? I mean, everybody. I mean, you said it's not circulated, it's not widely known. I mean, I feel like everybody knows this movie exists. But, I mean, Lucas is famous. We all know this movie exists, but nobody watches it. And I mean, I know a few people who have, but
it's like a completist. No, it's like a completionist film, isn't it? It's that thing of, I want to do George Lucas's sci-fi, oeuvre. And you go, okay, well, I've done the Star Wars films, so I need to go back and watch THX1138. I mean, one of the things is this film is an expansion of a student film that he did, which is the first thing. And one thing I would say is that's painfully evident, I would say. It's and it's not that this film is a bad film, actually. There's some bits I kind of like, but it's not.
That's going straight on the movie poster. There's some bits I kind of like. Scott Weatherly.
This is why this is why we remain unknown, because our criticism is like, yeah, it's all right. But yeah, I don't know. There's something about this film that it feels like they filmed the amount of footage needed for a feature-length film. But there's vast parts of this film where I'm just like, you don't really know what the story is anymore, do you? Like, you've just gone off on some weird tangent of something else, and this seems completely unrelated.
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that. I mean, this is his first feature-length film. Like you said, it's an expansion of a student film. It does feel that way. But I think being more used to the commercial Lucas, my first impression was how experimental it was. That, a lot of what you're talking about is like the meandering quality, the way that you often have a feeling that shots are just in there because they looked cool. I mean, like, that was interesting. That looked cool. Yeah, we just put that in there. And that is unsettling, but it's also kind of charming, especially for Lucas. It's certainly not what what I was expecting.
No, I agree. And if anything, actually, some of the parts I kind of like are the more experimental parts. Like some of the weirdness of this film is kind of what got me. And not even because some of the visuals are striking. Like, I can see, you in watching this, and obviously this is the updated version, but there's scenes in this that are unnerving. There's some scenes that are that are decidedly weird. And there's a character that comes in later on, SRT, who's the sort of the tall black guy. And there's this really weird, there's a statement he makes later on about being a hologram.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, and even like Robert Duvall's character THX is a bit like, what? Like there's these moments where sort of like it throws you off kilter slightly, and I do like that, and I do like that thing. It just feels still like it was stretched to 30. The whole, but we'll get to it. I mean, the plot in and of itself, I'll give a quick summary in a second. It's not hugely original. I mean, no. It's clearly sort of like a 1984 knockoff.
Brave New World.
New World. Yeah, it's that combination. It's that combination of those kind of stories. I mean, the story is sort of a future. I think it's 25th century, a future world. The human race lives underground because the surface world has been destroyed by environmentalism or environmental catastrophe or a nuclear war or something. I'm very sort of sure.
But we don't know that. I mean, in fact, it's not clear at all that the world has been destroyed. We never see the world above until the last shot, right? Yeah. I mean, which is kind of cool. But it's not at all clear that what you're told by the robots, that the world it's not safe above ground, is actually correct. So we really don't know anything about that.
No.
And I think one of the things that's most interesting but also most frustrating about this film is how little it tells you about, like you were mentioning about the wider world, but even about the world you're in and why, I mean, they don't speak present day English, which is charming, but it's also frustrating because you don't know, you sort of slowly clue in that people are not reproducing sexually anymore. But you have to, and that everybody's on drugs, but nobody ever tells you this. It doesn't have the crawl at the beginning. It doesn't have the Star Wars crawl to tell you,
That makes. I almost wonder if that was. I almost wonder if that was feedback. If someone was like, "Right, George, you need to have a bit more exposition," he's gone, "Right, how about if I write it down and just show everyone? Like, yeah, that's way to go. Yeah, no, I agree, and that's one of the. You're right about it being charming in that way. It's one of the things I do like about this. We've said this about a couple of films where you just sort of thrown in, and sort of like you have to keep up or you have to catch up. And I kind of that's one of the things I do again. I kind of respect about this film is, there is no sort of like exposition blurb where you end up sort of like meeting a character that's sort of going to tell you everything that's gone on with the world, and you're like, which I think we've got Logan's Run on the list, which is a very sort of got a similar sort of bent to it. And again, we'll talk about when we get to that, but you get a similar character in that where everyone's like, well, the world was destroyed, and da 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 da. And there's none of that. It's just sort of like, well, this is almost like a day in the life. Like for everybody else in this world, it's a day in the life. But you don't understand and this is one of the things I would say that becomes frustrating. I like to be able to catch. You said if you get thrown in and you have to catch up, that's great because I do kind of like that because it puts you off kilter. Or you have to catch up with the world. It's as we've said, like an alien place. It's supposed to be alien, and so I kind of like that. But at least give us a frame where things sort of make sense. Because when they do sort of this, you like you say, you pick up on the drugs, that's their control mechanism. You pick up on the way the relationships work. They're assigned a partner, or like a mate, as they refer to them, and this other stuff. And there's this sort of like these hologram televisions and all these other bits and pieces. But one of the things that sort of like, then they go into this white room that just seems vast and endless.
But that's like the prison later on. Yeah.
Yeah. Like later on, and you're like, okay, well, there's only like they keep walking, and that's where they meet SRT, and then there's like, okay, well, I've been walking in this distance, and I've got to go back. So they start walking back, and then they find a door that just comes out in a corridor. And you're like, right, how does this connect to things? Like, at least give me some sort of tangible geography that I'm able to sort of understand how this works. Because everything else sort of like, when there's corridors and stuff, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. There's going to be underground corridors, I'm fine. But then that thing just throws me off completely where I'm like, I don't understand how this fits into this thing. I don't know how it works. What's the guard system? How is it they can just leave? Like, and then they go on the run? Like, it all just seems...
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. That's not done very well. That does feel very student film. I mean, and I think that, another thing about this sort of decentralization, this kind of feeling of disorientation that we have, we're constantly being shown like people in control rooms saying things, and you have, I mean, it's kind of charming. You have television. Well, they have hologrammatic projectors, right? So you are constantly hearing, and then you have this religion thing, where you hear these sayings, but you don't know what they mean. And a lot of times it's not clear what they do mean, or, like, is this a crisis? Is this not? Is this normal? Is this not? You don't really know who's talking, whether this represents a, religion that's separate from the state, or, there's so much that you just don't know. And I think that's part of the charm. I mean, you're hearing these sentences that get cut off in the middle of the sentence all the time, that people are saying in control rooms. And, you're just sort of left to absorb it as best you can. And that's really ambitious. I mean, for Lucas, to me, I find it kind of, I mean, I don't know that I like this film, but I don't dislike it. And I do think that for Lucas, that seems like, where did this Lucas go? Where did that, like that, this is like the guy I want, like imagine this guy given, the money to do Star Wars, just going, doing stuff that just throws people into an alien universe, and, they don't explain midichlorians or whatever.
Yeah, no, one of the things I was sort of, as I was watching this, I was making connections, as you say, to other films. Star Wars was not one of them, which is what I was so confused. I was like, oh, wow. I was expecting to be like, oh, I can see where Star Wars came from. Like, there's a couple of shots where I'm like, oh, okay, I can sort of see that and stuff. But there's vast things where I'm going like, okay, I'm seeing Blade Runner. As I said, I was related to like 1984, Brave New World. But the booth, when Robert Duvall goes into that, like, say, the religious booth, and you've got the sort of the figure of Christ, and he's confessing. It's a confessional booth, and this thing is just regurgitating sort of like positive affirmations to him. And he's sort of like, he's confessing this thing's going like, well, yes, we understand why, and but you are good, and you are da 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 da. And I was like, this is a good idea, but nothing ever feels fully fleshed out. Like you say, it's never sort of resolved, because you do then get again later on, sort of Donald Pleasance's character, Sen, ends up in one of those sort of like churches of this religion. But like you say, but it never, and it's an interesting thing, because I sort of see what Lucas is after, where he's trying to say, look at the control and how religion is a control device, and he's trying to make this comment. But we've not seen enough of how these priests or how this religious element sort of controls society. Like, do they have to stop every day at a certain time to engage with it? Do they have to do? Is there a punishment if you don't? Like, you never see enough for it to actually have an impact. So that when Sen breaks into this place and starts trashing it and stuff, it doesn't have the impact I think that George Lucas wants it to have. And there's a couple of things like that, but I'm still like, this is actually, like you say, but there's an experimentalism to this where I'm like, if this was a bit more fleshed out, if it was thought out, like we said a few times, if it was given another draft, like there's something here that's really good. But yeah, it sort of disappeared.
And there is an aesthetic to it that, especially to the bald heads and everything, that I think is really good. I mean, and also to the sort of names, the way they all have these 3-letter surnames, prefix, and then digits afterwards. But they call each other like Thix, or the Sen, that they call each other by those prefixes as if they're a first name.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I found very confusing is that, I mean, you mentioned the religious thing. I mean, it sort of feels like something that could be in Videodrome. It sort of feels like something that could be in like Tommy. It's ambitious, but you're right. It does, like, it leaves more questions. I found myself wondering. It doesn't seem as if the Ohm 0000 is which is cool, is responding. Like, it clearly is hearing the audio, but it's not responding intelligently. No. These are like prefabbed answers. So this can't be emotionally confirming for people. So why do they then go to make these confessions? Is this being recorded by the state?
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Is it required? Yeah.
Right. And I mean, and is there a microphone in there that the state is picking up on what they're confessing to? I don't know. And
because he is confessing the things he's confessing against, because he's confessing about, like, he thinks there's something wrong with his mate. Is it LHD? Like, he's saying, like, I'm not entirely sure she's taking her, her drugs, and like she's acting weird, and so he's basically sort of selling her out. And LUH, yeah. And so, like, like you say, does that result in anything? Like, it sort of does, because they get split up, and he ends up sort of with Sen for a period of time.
I don't think it does, because I don't. Well, still, there is this question that I have, which is like, you're introduced to this state-controlled society, right? I mean, it's classic sort of fascist society. Okay, but then one question in any presentation like that is, how much control do you really have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, are there rebels running around that are out of view of the cameras? I mean, how much are in private? Do they really do what they want? And so, because you're never really shown, you never really have a sense of the society. No. And so, right from the start, you have, first of all, this idea of him saying that his mate he's concerned for her. She switches out pills, which is ultimately what causes him to have sex with her and then to screw up at his job. And causes basically the entire plot is really instigated by his mate,
who then disappears. Who then disappears from the film for a vast portion, and
who was killed off screen most likely. But then it's like, well, how common is that? Are other people not taking the drugs? And then you have the other character, the other male character, Sen, who is in the computer system assigning people mates, and and you think, well, that's obviously super criminal. That seems super easy for him to do. How often are people? Is it like I feel like it's either got to be a fascist, strictly controlled society, or it's one where people routinely, like you say the good thing and you say you're a good Christian and you love the state, but then you go home and do whatever you want, like Gilead or something, like it's all hypocritical. And this isn't really either.
And this is the thing, though. I think, I think what it's that thing of what is Lucas trying to portray. What it's almost like he wants to have a critique of something or present something, but he wants to sort of like have his cake and eat it, doesn't he? He wants to have these rebellious characters and these corrupt characters, but you then need to give them a structure, which is so. We're saying that the influence on others. You talked about a rebellion, like he did take this and develop it. He created the empire and the resistance, like the rebellion. So like he literally took this and sort of like worked it out into a much bigger thing. But you're right. I mean, Sen is a really fascinating character in the sense, like you say, he's supposed to be part of the control mechanism. He works in this booth. He's got access to all these things. He seems to, I can't remember, he puts himself together with THX and they have, they're in that room and they're talking. So there's the ability to corrupt the system, but it's not, but it seems to be relatively easy to do. But the other thing as well, you see other characters working in these booths across different like computer panels and monitors and that sort of thing, and they all seem very sort of controlled, and they're doing what they're supposed to do, and everyone's just doing their bit. And so is Sen, but then it never really. So Sen becomes a criminal, like he goes on the run with the whole thing, but you never sort of know his. Like, is this always been the way? Is he part of this resistance? Is he part of this thing? Is it? He knows LUH. Like they've clearly at one point it's commented that they know each other, but like, it's never really fully padded out and explained, and so it becomes really quite nebulous as to how this is. Because you never get to see the ruling elite as well. And one of those sort of rules of showing one of these societies, at least give a glimpse of the ruling elite. Like let you know how the state controls at the top, but there is no top to this. It's just bureaucracy. Maybe that's the case.
I kind of find that charming. I mean, I kind of find that, the nebulousness of this, the decentralization of this, because one of the things I always I object to the emperor, right? I mean, I object to, because, you've got to have that guy because you've got to defeat him, right? So, but I find we've talked about Doctor Who. I mean, when we've talked about those fascistic societies in Doctor Who, the scarier ones are the ones that don't have guys at the top for the Doctor to easily overthrow, right? And so, this could be a society that doesn't have a single person in charge. I mean, even thinking about like Alphaville, it's got the like AI in charge, right?
Yeah.
It's scarier if you think there's nobody in charge, right? It's
well, you
just
don't
evolved
know.
This way.
You just follow, and I like, because again, if you do sort of, because one of the things I thought about whilst watching this, with it being underground and just the working and some like those shots, and I think they must be CGI now, but like when you get THX is working when he's actually doing the work at his station, and it just goes on and on and on, and there's this row of people just working on these robot constructions, and you're like worker ants. That's all you do. You go, you do your job, you do your bit, and then you move on, do your day. And as you say, you're part of a system. You don't have to know what's at the top of the system, but you want to know, you just want to see that you are part of a system. You've never seen the whole system. And so I agree. I like that element of it is one of the things. But but if you're then going to have a rebellion against it, then you need to, at least, if you're going to rebel against it, if the film's going to show you the rebelling against it, you need to have at least sort of like the counter to show. You need to show the mechanisms they're rebelling against, and it's never entirely clear what it is they're rebelling against.
Yeah, and it's not entirely clear to me that it's a rebellion either.
No.
Like, I don't think it's an organized rebellion. I think Sen is just doing what he wants to do, right? Screwing with the, he's corrupt, but he doesn't seem to be, like, connected to anybody. He just seems to be a guy who's corrupt, and I do like this sort of like potential homosexual angle of him wanting to be assigned THX as a maid. Although these are explicitly non-sexual relationships, so that, I mean, that's interesting, maybe if safe, but there doesn't seem to be a formal rebellion. It seems as if all we know is that Sen does what he does, and that the THX's mate has stopped taking the pills and wants to spread that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is the early days of rebellion. That's where they're trying to LUH. I mean, she's the first one that's saying, like you say, she switches out the drugs, like they end up having sex. It's almost like that. This could have been the birth of the rebellion, but it doesn't go right. It doesn't go well enough that it becomes that resistance. So you say, LUH is taken away. Sen corrupts it and basically makes it a mess. So they get captured. But then you don't know, because again, like when you get to the end of the film, if you follow THX, he does really, he ends up to get chased down, and he goes on that big car chase at the end. He does make it to the surface. How do you know he doesn't come back and start to sort of like orchestrate a further resistance?
Right, he gets to the surface, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's up there, and says,
Hello
I
there.
knew Sen. Yes. A very posh British accent.
Yeah. Alec Guinness is waiting for him. I've been expecting you. Yeah, I don't know. It does feel that that I say there are ideas. Another idea that I kind of like, and it felt like, and again, Brazil was another one that came to mind whilst I was watching this. That felt like a bit more of an articulated idea. Is at the end of the film when THX is on the run. And you've got the car chase going on. You've got the two police sort of chasing him. One of the things they basically have a budget for his retrieval. I forgot what the number is, but they give like a budget, and they've got like a tolerance for how much of that they can spend. And when it goes over, they stop it. And I'm like, cool. That's actually a really interesting idea. This idea they've actually got like a metric that says actually financially, or like there's a metric that beyond this point, it's not worth capturing him. It costs too much money, and again, but that's introduced so late into the film. I was like, oh man, I'd love that to have been explored. Like, you have an accident at the start of the film. There's an explosion early on. You see sort of like one of the production lines explodes, and you get this over the tannoy going like, it's in so-and-so sector. This won't affect you. Carry on working. But you see it on these monitors. I'd have liked it if there was a part of that where they're like, right, we can shut this down now, but it'll cost this. It'll take us over this tolerance, and them going, actually, no, it's more effective for us to let it explode and kill these people and rebuild, like making decisions based on those metrics, because then you'd see it later on. But again, it never seems, there's ideas just dropped in that never seem to materialize.
Yeah, I think you're right that, I mean, there's a sort of collage of ideas here that don't really fit together. I mean, I do like that idea of, it's 5% over budget.
Yeah.
As soon as you go to 6, you've got to call in the cops. I mean, I buy it. But the second you're introduced to this idea, that's how he's going to escape, right?
Yes.
And it also is so anticlimactic to just be like, right, we've run out of money, literally. So let's end the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not very satisfying.
It may well have been a commentary on the actual budget of the film.
It could have. But, you mentioned about this explosion. And, I mean, let's be clear. You talked about the worker drones. There's a lot that I like about this film, or at least find interesting. However, I mean, these drones, these are people who are on calming drugs in order to help them perform these delicate techniques. And what they are doing is they're manipulating robotic arms to build the robot cops of this future society. The robot cops are atomic cops, and they've got a little piece of plutonium or some sort of radioactive
a power
thing.
source or something, isn't it? Yeah.
Right, and this all has to be done for some reason by human beings who have to do it in a line. I don't know why. And you see one of these production lines explode, and this is atomic radiation. There's no depiction of a cleanup, and like you said, you'd like to see them say like, oh well, it would cost too much to clean this up, just let these people die. There is this idea of like they're disposable because when THX leaves work, they say, oh, like, congratulations, we've only lost 190 people compared to like 260 at the rival factory. So like clearly life is cheap to that type, that type.
Yes, I did like that comment. That's a nice touch after the explosion.
But at the same time, it's like, right, how does that work, right? I mean, you have, first of all, you have atomic cops. Why are they atomic? I mean, that means like when they're destroyed in those chase sequences, like that's an atomic accident. There's 35,000 of them going around. Why can't they build themselves?
Two things. No, I agree, because there were two elements to that. If they're all on subduing drugs, so they're not like rampant criminals running around. There doesn't appear to be like there's not like an underworld that needs to be policed. So why do you need so many police officers? And I say, why are they being powered by this radioactive material? But the other question is, I think this is, and I want us to get to this point about special editions. I don't think that was originally the intention. So I went back and I had a look at what you see in the special edition is a glowing rod, right? Or a block. I can't remember this now, but like you see them manipulating it, and then when THX has like a I don't know, like a blackout, like a phase out at one point, like he drops a piece of radioactive material and it burns through, like it melts its way through several things. So this is incredibly dangerous. All that is added CGI. All that is added. In the original, it's just a metal. They show like a metal thing being dropped into a metal slot because that's all they could afford. So like, there's no. It's more of a construction process than this sort of like nuclear process. So in the original, this thing of adding nuclear power stuff is clearly coming later on. So when you do see those, in the original version, those police crashing, those droids crashing later on, would be less of an issue. But I don't know. It feels sort of, again, this comes back to the structure of the society. Like, I get that it's sort of thing, but like, it's global, so you don't know that it might just be that these police are created here and then shipped across the world. I don't know.
Well, we don't know that it's global.
No,
we don't even, we know they have 35,000, a little more cops, because you see that number tick down as they're destroyed. But, we don't know. I mean, it could be Mega City 1 underground. I mean, or it could be global. It could just be, this is a city, sort of like Logan's Run size, underground. I don't know.
And that's the thing, again, like, this is where I'm saying, you're saying it's charming to be dropped in and to not see, but you want at least enough information to infer something to be able to sort of fill in headcanon. We've said this before about, like, this is what my headcanon tells me, but like, you need at least something to imply some of that stuff, and there's not enough here to really do that, I suppose.
Well, and that's the same thing is true of whether the main character survives. He gets to the surface. He might be in a radioactive wasteland, or he might be completely safe. You don't know. I mean, it's a beautiful symbol, him seeing the sunset or sunrise, but that's beautiful. But it just abruptly ends there. There's so much that you don't know.
No, I agree with that, because one of the things I was curious about, actually, like I say, is that intent of what is he escaping to? Because it becomes like, he's escaping from, but it never seems clear like what he is escaping to, and so it becomes curious as okay, so he's now got this idea of getting to the. Well, no, let me put it this way. At what point does his motivation change? So for THX, like, he's on the run, and it's because of sort of like he's now experienced these things, but like him escaping to get to the surface, is that a goal? I never sort of get that, like, it becomes like a goal for him to get to the surface, or is it just to get away, and that getting to the surface becomes like a bit of an accident?
I think it's a bit of an accident. My interpretation is that it took me a while to kind of figure this out, but that he's quite content with the society. He informs on his mate, It's the mate who switches his, because he already seems like the protagonist. He is. I mean, but he's actually quite content with the society. The mate switches the pills. Then because he doesn't have these calming pills, he screws up at work. And because he drops that rod initially, those monitor people do that like mind freeze thing on him, that then they're not thinking, the people who make that decision are not like aware of the fact that, oh yeah, this is going to cause a worse accident. But the end result of this is he's basically a prisoner. He's informed on Sen, and he's sent to prison and finds out, okay, his mate has been killed, recycled, but his baby still. He seems like he wants to get back to her. He sees her again. It seems like his motivation is then to like escape and get back to her. But then he sort of seems to realize, like, I'm in a chase for my life. I just want to get away. I think she's already dead anyway. And so that's how I sort of see it.
That's how you see it, exactly.
Right.
But it's never explicitly said. Like, again, there's no sort of like scene where he's like, and again, this is what I'm saying. Like, the motivation clearly changes, or like, at least events conspire to drive him in a different direction. But you're a bit like, oh, he's doing that now. Fair enough. I mean, it's a bit like Sen as a character is interesting, because I always like Donald Pleasance as a presence. I just find him strangely comforting, and maybe it's because all the times I had to watch The Great Escape as a kid. I don't know, but there's a scene when they escape from the prison, when they escape from that thing, and they've got him and the big guy. But there's like a crowd, like it's a massive crowd of people. Like it's like, and this is that other thing of sort of like, this is the underground. It's like an ant nest, isn't it? Like everyone's just busying around, and Sen gets caught in the middle of it and jostled and bustled, and then gets completely sort of lost from the group. And so he just basically sits down and just converses with these two kids, and he's sort of talking with these two kids, and then just accepts being arrested, and he's just like, all right, that's it, I'm done. And again, I'm like,
I love that. Yeah,
I kind of like that he accepts it, but I'm a bit like, is that like the end of that character? Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really like that, and you at least see like you see a monk, and you see like these kids playing, and they have this sort of like game that they're playing that that is weird. And one of the things that this movie does really well is its depiction of like an alien society. And so we've talked about that when it comes to extraterrestrials, but here it's a future society. They don't speak English the same that we do. And also, like, their sense of humor. Those hologram shows are marvelously alien, right? Like, the humor is just, I mean, it's so weird. And I really love that. I mean, and that is part and parcel of just throwing you into this bizarre world. That stuff works great for me.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
No. I would say, since we're, you're talking about Sen, and how he winds up, I would say that, the ending, while, I mean, this is a movie that I definitely, I did not dislike, but then, and I've said some good things about, I definitely had to fight falling asleep during this film. You get to the ending, and it's like, all right, a chase, right? Finally, here's the money shots, right? Here's, and you're seeing all of that. And at the same time, that ending is, in retrospect, some of the most disappointing stuff. Not just because, of running out of budget, is the reason why he gets away. But also, like, I mean, this is a car chase. I mean, it's the most, I mean, even before the car chase, running away from these cops, it does remind me of stormtroopers, where it's like the stormtroopers can't shoot straight. They're the most incompetent people ever. You've got these robot cops, and the robot cops you see like beating people with nightsticks. That is, like you said, it's not clear that there's any crime, but you get lots of footage of robot cops love to beat people with nightsticks, right? Because cops are fascists. And, okay, I get it. But then they're so easily defeated. At one point, they're trapped in a control room, and they just open the door and cause the cops to fall inward and just jump over them and run away.
Oh yeah,
That's
it's Keystone Cops kind of stuff. Like this is that thing of like pushing a turtle on its back and it just sort of waving around and sort of like not able to get away. Yeah, there's a number of scenes like that I'm just like, what is the point of them? Like, I don't understand. Like you say, they're depicted as a threat, but then shown not to be a threat.
Yeah, you get the idea that like I'm like, man, I could run forever. Like I am not scared of these guys at all. By the like, at first they seem scary at first because you see the brutalizing, but by the end, I just think, man, I would be running this society in a week.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the police because again, the design is very obvious. You know, they've designed this thing. They're wearing the sort of the black leather of they look like motorcycle cops, and they've gone for that sort of look. And then they've got the silver sort of chrome faces and stuff like that. And obviously it's there to be sort of they look faceless and they're all the same and blah blah blah. It's all very, yeah, exactly. It's all the same stuff. It's all very sort of, we've seen this 100 times. But one of the things is they are not, with stormtroopers, and again, he sort of perfects this slightly, is stormtroopers, although useless, seem to be coordinated and in another way that they are sort of like they are designed to be soldiers. There are several scenes in this where I'm really confused about the sort of the point of the police. Like they go into a locker room at one point and you see one of the droid robots getting dressed. And I'm just like, hang on, why is he putting gloves on? Like, should that not be part of his, like his make? Is that not part of him? Like, why is he sat there putting his boots and his gloves on? Does he go home at night and sit in like slippers? Like, I don't understand this.
Does he have a mate too?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't get the sort of, but then there's another one when they're going through, I think it's like a server farm kind of looking thing, lots of computers and lots of things going on, and the two police robots like lose them, and one of them sort of seems to commiserate with the other one. They sort of like he's like, oh well, maybe next time, kind of thing. And you're like, sorry, they got emotions. Are these droids or are they? I don't know what these robots are. Like I'm a bit confused to their programming now.
Well, keep in mind, right? There's a thin line between the stormtroopers in Star Wars and the droids, right? Droids are a big part of it. And, obviously in the prequels, they're clones,
but they're still people, but they're still an entity, they're still a person, like, and they have personality. Like, you watch.
Are they though?
Well, they're supposed to be. You watch like but you watch Rebels and these are the additional supplementary materials.
That's later though.
Yes, true.
Right. I mean,
true.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, like technically they're organic, but they're made to be disposable. I mean, to the point that if you had told a kid in 1980, ask the kid, are those people or robots? I'm not sure a kid in 1981 would know.
That's true.
I don't know.
No, that's a good point because you never see them without their helmet in the first sort of the original trilogy. I don't know. The cops but the robot cops are a very bizarre. I don't know the point of them. Like, are you trying to show them as fascists or are you trying to show them as people? Look, it's very sort of like the messages again and the ideas in this are very, like you say, it's a collage of ideas that doesn't always hang together. And if there's so many of them, I mean, even the holograms as well. Like that sequence, and again, I really like that sequence. Again, this is that alien thing of like the lifestyle, the habitat as well. Like it's very sort of, it would become. This is the thing I would say is it becomes a cliche. Like a lot of the stuff that's in this becomes a cliche, but it's still, this is 1971, so it's still got some really quite unique ideas, I suppose.
What becomes a cliche?
Well, just that sort of that clinical environment, that sort of as a habitat. Like everything, all the walls are white. There's just that thing with the drugs in the wall, and then they've got the chairs, they're very sparse. Would become almost like you'll see that come up again and again in these kinds of films. I think of like Equilibrium is another one with the Christian Bale film, which is like that's got more fun in it. That's got Gun Carter in it and some stupidity. But what I would say is I like is this thing is like they still, although they've got this suppression of emotions, and you said they're not sort of sexual beings in the sense of like mating with their mate. He goes home and they got the hologram, and but he does watch. There is sort of like almost like pornography on this hologram, and he watches that woman. They have a machine that sort of like
jacks you off.
Yeah, basically, for all intended purposes. Now that's CGI.
That's what it's literally doing.
Yeah, but that's not in the original. That's a CGI. Yeah. Some poor sod, like George Lucas was like, I want to have this machine do this.
No,
and he's like,
something was there in the original, right?
Nope,
and they
nope,
didn't add a masturbation scene.
Nope, they did. Oh, the scene's there, but it's suggested in the original that it's Duvall doing it to himself.
Oh, by hand. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they introduce it, in the special editions, the machine is added to add another sort of like sterile element to it.
It's like it kind of reminds me of like the Dalek plunger. It's like now I know what the Dalek plunger was for.
That's what they were originally made for. Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
But there was something that, as I was going through this, and again, I wasn't 100% sure, and I had to go back, and then I read it. But when you go through, like, the woman that's dancing, and then and they obviously tied it up, and as you say, it sort of then it goes to the police brutality with one of those cops like beating a guy, and then there's like a guy trying to sell a car, and then there's a talk show, and then you get the sort of the guy dancing, and it goes through those channels. So they're all but they're all black.
Yeah.
Everybody that's on the television is a black person. So you get the black woman dancing, and then they're all like, and it wasn't until I read it and they were like, oh yeah, the only other person you see is SRT, is that they meet in the prison, and he claims to be. He says, "Oh, I'm a hologram," but I think what he means is he works in the entertainment industry. Like he works, he's part of that hologram industry or whatever. And so there's this weird segregation because all these other characters are white. Like when you see the scene with Sen being bustled around, at least he hasn't, Lucas has tried to state at this point that all those people you see are white. But there's still black people in this community, in this existence, in this world, because you've seen them on the television. So I find that fascinating as well, that like there's an acknowledgement of that. But I don't know what it means.
I don't know what that means either, right? It's strange, right? It's like there's racial segregation, but like in a way, the black citizens have a greater prestige, or do they? Are they?
Is it part of
entertainer slaves? Do they have high status or low status? I don't know.
Exactly. So again, it's that thing of like, you have to be sort of thrown into it. But then you are introduced to a character in SRT that should be giving you this information, that should be saying, like, well, I had all this, I had everything, and it was taken away from me, or like I escaped.
Or you don't know what it's like being a hologram. It's really brutal.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, do they have like the Running Man kind of shows where like, oh, they chase us down and the police beat us, and that's part of entertainment? Like, is this like, is this verging on like RoboCop level satire kind of thing? I don't know. And again, so it comes to this idea, but you don't get a full articulation of what he's trying to say with it.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And it's far more important that SRT is there to show them how to get out of the prison. Mm-hmm. That's why he's there, right? That's why he's introduced. The fact that he is an entertainer, and is a hologram and is a black character all of a sudden is not important. No,
but it should be. Like,
right, of course, yeah,
because it's
fascinating.
It is fascinating, yeah. But like, and again, if I am, if you were Sen or THX, like, and you then meet this black character, and the only way that you've seen those, these kind of people is through this hologram thing. Like, surely there'd be an element of like, I don't know, not starstruck or something, but you'd be reacting to it, wouldn't you? Be like, oh my god, like, you're real. Like, I don't know how this works. Like, you'd have questions at least. I don't know. It just feels very sort of like they just go and carry on.
Or they'd recognize him and say, oh, like, you're black. That means that you're a hologram. And the other thing that's interesting is it's a sort of like I mean. So let's talk about sex a little. Let's talk about sex, baby. So they take these pills where they suppress their sexual desire, and you clearly have audio that says like libidinous crimes, right? That like libido is a crime. But they still have sexual desire because they have these masturbation holograms. It's interesting that the masturbation holograms are of black people, which you would think is that glamorizing the black body, which has been linked to, racism in the past, this strange way that, we can glorify and also objectify, and degrade at the same time. So that's very interesting. But they must still have libido if they have that.
If they're reacting to it, yeah.
And then you have, just like you have it's possible to assign a male-male mate. It's also possible he also puts on a male dancer, and nobody reacts to it, which, seems very progressive in 71 to have those messages. So I'm not sure exactly how sex works in this world. I mean, it's clear that reproduction isn't sexual anymore, but somehow people still need a mate.
Yeah. Well, again, like you say, is it cloning? Are they, is that, is there another factory somewhere else that's doing the cloning work to create these citizens? Don't know. But again, this idea of having a mate, again, it's never, you don't see people in a single habitat or that have lost a mate. Is it to do with companionship? Is it to do with
observation, control?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a bit like you talk about Doctor Who. I mean, one of the things that episode, the Peter Davison one, where you have that couple that are observing everything and stuff, and like, but I have slightly different opinions. That's exactly what that is. It's like they're together. It's never fully explained if they're together as husband and wife. But one of them reports the other one, and they threaten to do it on a number of occasions throughout the episodes. And so you are like, they're there for observation, to sort of like almost, buddied up to sort of, well, we can't keep an eye on everybody, so you keep an eye on each other, sort of thing. I don't know. It seems that this is better articulated in the Doctor Who episode than it is in this film. But it's a good idea. I like this idea, and again, this idea that it can be manipulated, but it for whatever purpose. But I don't know the point of it within the society. Like, how does it work as a process?
Yeah, and there is a line when we find out about the woman's fate. I think there's a line about how, somewhere around there's a line that she's like been taken to the like reproduction plant or something, or that seems to suggest that it's some sort of like Battlestar Galactica like farm where they like farm babies, in some horrible, horrible
almost
way.
Like Julian, then she could become like a like a birth mother kind of thing, like
Yeah, except one imagines that it's not the turkey baster method, of impregnation, but who knows? But again, like you said, we don't know. There's basic things that we don't know. The same thing you mentioned earlier, but it's worth returning to, is the religious aspect. How did this evolve? It's clearly like a image of Jesus somehow, but clearly this religion has evolved. It's not the Christianity that we know. Do people find solace in these rote responses? There's a monk. Clearly he has some sort of privilege. He's one of the few people we see who's not just dressed in the same uniform. Obviously there's a special social caste of monks. What is his role? How is this? Is the whole mate thing like a religious injunction? I don't know.
Yeah, right. You're right, because he seems to have like where he's at. Like they have like cameras and stuff on things. It's clearly broadcast as well. But like we don't know what they broadcast, and sort of like say you don't know what power they have or influence or standing they have in the society. One of the things I was thinking about, because the other thing this sort of brought to mind for me was a short story that I did on sister podcast 20th Century Geek for Storytime at the start of the year. It was one of the first ones I did, actually. It was called The Machine Stops by E.M. Forrester.
Yeah.
I talked about it with Tony Farina, and again in that story, it's an underground society. It's told from the perspective of these two people, a mother and a son, and you learn a lot going on. Like, there's this whole thing of like, once you give birth, you hand the child into a sort of a raising program that then goes off, but you can still connect to the child if you want. But you live within this sort of honeycomb thing that sort of controls everything, and you have everything you need from within your. And the machine is what provides it for you. And the machine is sort of like the god entity, if you will, in this story. And then they're repulsed by the outside world. They say the above world is supposed to be this this cataclysmic event, but they've never looked at it because they're repulsed by it. And eventually, sort of like, the sun becomes a character that escapes into climbing up a funnel, much like THX, and escapes onto the surface world and actually finds that there's people there and there's things going on and this other stuff. And the machine collapses underground, and so it becomes this sort of rebellion. That was 1903. But there were so many elements in this program. I'm like, in that short story, like, they don't articulate everything. You don't know everything about what happens. But there's more information in that sort of, like, I think it's like a 8 to 10 page short story than there is in this film. Where I'm just like, and it made me think about other films like this that I know exist. I mentioned Equilibrium, but like. There are other films where you're thrown into a distant future or whatever. Even like, you say about like, you said Mega City 1, like, so even like the, Judge Dredd and these stories like that. So it had like 45 years to grow a story, but you get to know the system. Like, you are at least presented with a sort of a system of control and a system of sort of thingy. And Equilibrium's like, you again is about a similar thing where you sort of, they have all their emotions suppressed, and they destroy it. Again, like, what's the Fahrenheit,
451.
Yeah, 451. So it's exactly the same thing where it's like, okay, well, this is how the future society works, by destroying art and culture and anything that aspires to be emotional, that sort of thing, much like an Equilibrium. And so you have these characters that then sort of reframe their view on the world and become a part of the rebellion or whatever, like, whatever's going to happen. Like, in Equilibrium, Christian Bale becomes a leader of the rebellion or all that other shit. I mean, it's a good film. It's a fun film, but it's very silly. But you get to see this framework of what it is. But you also get to see it's at least indicated as to why they get there. The reason we now
you have a sense for the society, right?
Yeah,
and you're saying there's a sense for how it evolved. Yeah,
or there's at least a purpose. So they'll say sort of like, there's this indication of, we got here because of, so whether it be sort of like, through a fascist society, we've just grown this thing of that's the enemy because that's our control mechanism. And so, those things, that's why this sort of structure now exists, because that's the other thing that we sort of, we see as the enemy. And that's what we sort of, we group behind, if you will, the burning of books, or, as a firefighter, as a fireman, or an Equilibrium. It's like, well, emotion led to conflict and conflict led to war. So we removed emotion to make a sort of stable society. That's the idea. So we're removing things that stimulate emotion. That's the point. And you go, okay, it's not a great idea. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but fair enough. You're giving me something to work with. But with THX, I'm still like, I don't get why this has happened. Like, like you said, I want at least something that says, this is actually a good thing. Again, going back to what we said about these rebellion things. Again, what Westworld season 3, the AI with Alpha Villain, same with them. You are provided with a context of like this AI now makes all the decisions for society, but you get this rebellion. But we were saying, well, show us the good though, because there's clearly a good to this. What is the reason that this is in place, and who is this benefiting, or what has it worked? Has this solved the problem that they thought was there to solve? And so you get that sort of like that angle to take from. But with this, I don't feel that I know what caused it. I don't know why it's there. What was the problem they solved? Why was libido was there sort of a sexually transmitted disease? What was killing the population? And so the only way to stop it was to stop sexual reproduction. So they've they suppressed libido to do that. And I don't know.
Or was that seen as emotional?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, was that it could be religious too, because there's that element. I mean, it seems as if there's some sort of post-apocalyptic sort of scenario in which they at least think the surface world is contaminated. But, I mean, also, like, what does the society do besides make androids, atomic androids? But I mean, what does anyone do? Monitor each other and make atomic androids seems to be all that happens.
Well, one of the things this is one of those things I find, I do find frustrating in these kinds of films, because you've seen Robert Duvall's job. He makes robots.
Yeah.
But they live in a habitat. They have chairs. There is a TV show. They have food. They have drugs. They have clothing. They have cars. There are roads for those things. There are, at one point, you see he goes through a tunnel and there's a scaffolding system and people are repairing the tunnel.
Yeah, there's workers, right?
Workers, yeah. So there are other jobs going on.
Right.
So, and we know that Sen works in one of these other these booths, this sort of control panel. So, okay, cool. So there are other things going on, but you're making this big deal about this person making the cops. So is that, again, so you trying to say something that we build our own control mechanism, that we we end up building the thing that controls us? I don't know. Like, give me a clue. I can read into that and say that's the if I was to write an essay, you can do all that.
Right. Yeah, you're right.
I don't think it's what is actually there.
Yeah, I mean, it is there. It's just not. You don't come away from the film saying, "Oh, that's what was intended there." Yeah. Instead, you just feel like, well, I have a very sketchy idea of how the society functions. To the point about those construction workers, I found that whole, I've already mentioned that I find the ending both, gives a jolt of adrenaline and also is so unsatisfying. I mean, I like that Sen just gives up. I think that's probably the most satisfying for me, although that seems anticlimactic. I found that remarkable. Then you have these cars that are like these sports cars. Yeah. They go like over 200 miles an hour. They seem to function in a completely illogical way. The black guy takes one and crashes it immediately.
Can I just point out there's something, because that was a Ford GT that he gets into.
Is it?
Is it? Yeah. But I didn't know if this was meant to be a joke, because he's tall. Like, the guy's clearly like 6 foot plus. Like, he's a really tall guy, and they give him one of the most compact cars to get into. And I was like, is this supposed to be a joke? Because it's clearly uncomfortable for him to be getting into. But I was like, it's cool. It's a great looking car, and it's quite an interesting thing that he chose it. But I was like, I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a joke. I don't know.
And why do they have a Ford GT? I mean. I don't know. I don't understand what's going on with these cars, except Lucas wants to have a car chase. I mean, with these cops on motorcycles, because they're wearing the motorcycle leather, and they have the stormtrooper boots, chasing after a speed racer car. Can we just say, like, in addition, if we ran out of budget, so just call the cops back. Well, I mean, which again could be interesting if done right. I mean, we have these discussions about like high-speed chases on the highways in real life. I mean, this is an interesting idea if really explored, but it's not really explored. Instantly it's going to be the way that the good guy gets away, the protagonist anyway. But then also, I mean, the car overheating and stopping and then cooling down enough that it'll start again has to be one of the least satisfying, dramatic, monkey wrench consequences, in a chase sequence ever concocted.
Well, there are two things to this. I 100% agree. This first thing, because they're trying to ratchet up the tension that he's about to get caught. So they're trying to introduce almost like a ticking clock thing of it sort of cooling down. I'm like, cool, all right, interesting. But then you've also seen roads of vehicles going at high speeds. And this one, when he's on the tunnel on his own, it just stops. So what happens if then a vehicle stops on one of those high speed like flyovers? Does it happen a lot? That seems incredibly dangerous and inefficient. Like, because then cars just pile into the back of it, all doing 200 miles an hour. Like, yeah, it's such a bizarre choice. I'm like, our cars today, like, we have obviously currently, petrol fuel cars, or even like, new electric or hybrid cars. You can overheat a car. You have a radiator, that's what it's there for. And with electric cars, there's other ways of doing things. But at no point do they just sort of, unless it's really damaged, does the car just go, I'm overheating, so I'm going to stop. Like, it's sort of, you know it's coming, and so you'd pull over and stuff. But I don't know, it just feels so sort of like bizarre that this car just goes, I'm hot now, and stops. And
yeah, well, and you see that little gauge.
Yes.
That the gauge doesn't seem to move at all until it's time for it to overheat. And then it just shoots right into the red across the entire bar.
And then when it goes green, it goes right back down again. It doesn't just sort of gradually, it goes like green, and it's sort of like,
It's a very bizarre, dramatic choice. It that does seem like one of those sort of Star Wars things where you think, especially later Star Wars, where you go, yeah, you haven't thought about how this worked. This was just a dramatic choice for you. And it's sad that is one of the least successful parts of this film. And that unfortunately is one that most reminds me of like the pod chase scene.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, like, he then goes, because at the end of the race, at the end of the chase, even, sorry, is him going through that scaffolding, and then it all sort of crashes. If it would have been more satisfying if, like, he had stopped of his own accord and had to make a decision, like, look, the only way I can get away is to crash through that scaffolding, but I know I'm going to hurt these people.
Mm-hmm.
Do I stop now and give up, or do I do that? And he chooses to sort of like to plow through the scaffolding, hence, potentially hurting people to get away. Like, make him make that choice. I don't know. Yeah, it feels so arbitrary. The whole ending seems very arbitrary. That it's just like, okay, we need a stunt, we need this, we need that, and then they'll do it. Although I would say, right, if you watch that scene of everything else, I double checked this because of all the CGI. The two motorcycles crash.
Yeah. And
those are practical stunts of those guys getting hurled around that road. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
That's like, I was quite impressed with that. I'm like, kudos to those two motorcycle stuntmen for that. But other than that, I'm like, yeah, it's
yeah, I didn't think it looked great though. I mean,
no, it looks lumpy though. They hit that tarmac hard, and so I was like, okay, you did that for this film, fair enough. But like, it still looks. It looks hard hitting, which I was quite impressed with.
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, again, like that deactivates those robots. I mean,
yes.
I don't know. The whole chase thing, like, I don't understand why the first car crashes. I don't understand. All the cars, when they're started, seems to rev up to 200 miles an hour instantly and squeal their tires. And in fact, after he overheats and he starts up again, he does a 360.
He loses control of the car. Yeah.
Well, why? I mean, is there no? What is the gas pedal that he's pushing all the way down, and causing this absurd amount of smoke and just spinning out? I don't understand why it's doing this, except Lucas thought it looked cool.
I think that was a mistake. I honestly watched that section when that car starts and it spins out and then drives off. I thought that was a mistake. I think that driver lost control of that car a little and regained control doing what he did. And I think exactly that. I think Lucas went, no, that looks ace. That's awesome. Faster and more intense. That's the one. That was the one. And I think that's exactly what happened. That's how it looks to me. Where I think that guy's like, no, I want to start again. And he's like, no, it looked brilliant. And you go, but it makes no sense.
No, it makes no sense. I will say, I mean, I don't find, like, why are those guys working in the middle of the tunnel? I mean,
yeah, what's the purpose of the tunnel? Because it doesn't seem to go anywhere.
Where's it going? Right, exactly. What's the purpose of this clearly well-maintained tunnel? Why are guys working in the middle of it for no discernible reason?
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand any of this. Who is maintaining this tunnel? I mean, nobody's using it. No. Why? This is an empty tunnel. We've seen roads and stuff, but this is an empty tunnel. You can just stop and overheat. Nobody's going to come behind you except the motorcyclist. But yet it's got sensor. I mean, they know exactly how many feet away or whatever distance it is. so clearly there's monitoring equipment there. I don't know, none of this really makes any sense. It's like the most illogical sort of like random car chase.
I think because of the crashes and everything as well, it feels so incongruous with the rest of what's happened in the film. Where you said like an adrenaline burst. It is almost like, right, well, we've had this sort of like surrealist chase around a white zone. We've had Sen sort of like, battered around in this sort of like crazed sort of scene of hundreds of people and then just give up. Now I need to introduce some action. And you go, that's not the film that you've made. Like, that's not this film. Like, there's been no other action. There's been nothing else. Like, why do you need this at the end?
You shot 15 minutes of this movie is them up against a white void. You are not the car chase movie.
No, like this. It's such a bizarre choice. Where I'm like, there's an ending to this film that's, the car chase is so unneeded. But like you say, also it does add a little bit of adrenaline when you're like, oh, cool, something that's interesting happened. But like, yeah, it feels so separate to the rest of the film. It's bizarre.
I will say this about that shot though, where he's losing control, as you say, and he's starting up after having overheated. The way that shot is framed, the car is all the way on the right edge of the screen, and it is a brilliant framing for that shot. I mean, I was so taken by it, and I thought, I can't imagine anyone shooting this way, and I certainly can't imagine Lucas, who always, I mean, the Star Wars films, even though he didn't direct most of them, I mean, but they always go for the most obvious framing, and I thought that was such an aggressive choice. And I was quite taken with that shot, even though I hate what's happening in it. I don't think what's happening in it makes any sense. I don't understand how these cars work. I mean, and at that point, of course, like, we've already seen the Keystone Cops routine. Like, these stormtroopers, these drone cops, like, are not any, like, you could just get out of the car and wait for them to show up and knock them over. I mean, you're not scared of them at all. There doesn't seem to be any sense of threat at that point.
But the thing is, well, because there's two things I want to talk about before we sort of wrap, before we get to the end. But the other thing to note is, you say about the sense of threat, and because this is a chase movie for all intent and purpose. There's a large portion this is a chase movie. Cool. Then it needs to feel like a threat. Like, you need to be feeling like the Terminator, or that the police are a sort of a threat or something, like, or Mad Max, where like if they get hold of you, it's to the end sort of thing. But then the other thing is, it needs to feel either triumphant or disappointing when he gets to the end. Do you know what I mean? Like, that ending needs to feel like, if you've had the chase and he has succeeded or he has gotten away or whatever, like, you need to have something. I'm happy with, introducing an element of ambiguity, like what happens next, like, leave it open-ended. I'm fine with that. But if he gets to the surface and we just get this sort of like sunset or sunrise shot, and again, I like the shot, it's great, but tell me something about what he has found. Has he got to the surface and it's sort of like, are we talking Planet of the Apes, where it's like, damn you, this was all for nothing kind of thing? Or does he get to the surface, go over a ridge and just find this beautiful, vista of trees and lakes and a natural sort of like, what does he find? I don't know. What's the point of the ending?
Is it, well, you're right. I mean, what you're saying is there should be an emotional cue there. We don't need answers, but we should at least know, like, should we feel good about that he's triumphed, or,
Because you say about you say about, like, this film, it's struggling to stay awake, and I was exactly the same. Actually, I was watching this film and I tried not to pick up my phone repeatedly. But one of the things I would say that this film, and again, I don't need this all the time, but one of the things that this film fails at is engaging me on an emotional level. But there are things that are interesting, like that whole thing in the white void. I actually kind of like. In fact, I really like. I think it's interesting. I think it's bold. I think it's a fascinating choice. I love this idea of being trapped in this void as a prison, where you're just like, I don't know which way is which. I don't know which way we've walked. It's like, it's
kind of like the Phantom Zone or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just trapped in this void, this endless void. You see people that are just like giving up in this place. I'm like, this is such a good idea. In fact, if anything, I'd expand on it to have people that are like broken by it, like these people that are like, I can't take it anymore. I think it's a really good idea. I think there are other scenes that I'm like, I love that the vision of them all just autonomously building more robots, like, you know, human robots building robots. Like, I love these ideas. I think there's some really cool shots. And so again, you know, although this is a patchwork of ideas that are not all fully realized or even fully sort of like rendered, there's some really cool stuff in there. I'm like, oh, I like that, oh, I like that, oh, I like that. But then overall, I'm going like, it's not. I don't feel the plight of THX or Sen or, you know, LUD or SRT. Like, none of these characters. Like, when SRT dies in that car crash, I don't feel anything. I'm not like, he was almost away. Like, it doesn't feel like it was you know, so close, and it was you know, this was a terrible thing. I'm like, it's not looking to engage me on an emotional level. Okay, then it needs to engage me on an intellectual level. Like, it needs to challenge me with these ideas. But it's not. It's not rendered enough to do that. So it's almost like it's almost constantly trying to hit me at things, but it's just not doing enough. And maybe this is me. I don't know. Maybe it's me. I'm missing something. But like, so when it gets to the end and he gets on, and it has this almost like it's trying to be triumphant. Like, that's the sun, the silhouette. It's supposed to, you know, hell. If he was to stand up on a rock and put his hands on his hips, like, you know, you're one sort of section away from sort of Luke Skywalker looking at the twin suns. Like, it's
that's right.
It's totally there to be a heroic shot, but it means nothing. It doesn't have any impact on me. And so that's where the disappointment comes. I'm like, there's so much potentiality here. Again, I think of like Gattaca. Gattaca was a cold film. We talked about this in the last season. Like, Gattaca was a cold film in many respects, but I still had like an emotional impact when, like, at the end of that film, when Jude Law climbs into that furnace and stuff. Like, I still feel something because I've spent time with that character. I get his frustration, I get his purpose, and this other stuff. Like, the end of that film means something to me, where it has silly moments, and we talked about how that culture and that society doesn't always kind of fit together or kind of work. But that film made me feel something and made me care about those characters. And so I don't know. It just feels this film lacks in almost every respect. Just like, it's almost like, you know, it's like everything's an almost just a miss. I don't know. Am I wrong? Am I right? I don't know.
I think what you said when you started was quite brilliant about how it doesn't engage you emotionally, but that's okay. But it also doesn't engage you intellectually. That it's not fully painted enough, fully conceived enough. I think Gattaca is an interesting example because Gattaca does engage both emotionally and intellectually. It might be superficial in both. You know, it's not a fully emotionally engaging film, and it's also not a fully rendered intellectual exercise. But it knows what it's about intellectually, or wants to be about, and it knows which characters you're supposed to root for. This movie doesn't. And I'm cool with that to a certain degree. But I think, I think I'd be cool with this if the characters were the same, you know, we don't know who to root for, et cetera, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with there's no overarching intellectual message, like this is about control, this is about, you know, I don't need that shit, you know. But if the details of this future world were so immersive that instead of feeling like they're random little elements that are thrown in, that I know I have the confidence that the filmmaker has a fully fleshed out, detailed world that I am just being really immersed in, where then I would find myself looking for clues, looking for every little detail. And there are times where this movie, I think this is the thing the movie does the best. There are times where this movie gets to that, where you think, oh, okay, I figured out, right, how this works, or I know what that saying means now, right? Where you're like, oh, okay, you have that, but you never feel as if that's part of a puzzle piece of a fully rendered painting of a world.
Yes.
And if it were, I could have that intellectual pleasure of just saying, like, great, I'm dropped into an alien civilization. This is like experimental. Maybe I don't care about the characters. I don't know who to root for because it's an alien civilization. It's not going to have one-to-one equivalence. It's an emotionally repressed civilization. It's not going to be like, rah, rah, here's your Luke Skywalker hero.
Yeah.
I'm fine with all of that. But it's just that way that I think it is most successful. It doesn't feel as if it really is a fully formed society that you're getting these little glimpses of. It feels like it's just a piece here and there.
Yeah, exactly. I think you hear of like directors, in all sort of genres and stuff. Like I can imagine like Denis Villeneuve having something like this, or Ridley Scott, or one of those, or even like Guillermo del Toro, being like, yeah, you've seen this, but I've got this folder stacked with like a Bible. Like, this is how this world works, and there's like entire stories that I've got in this Bible, in this sort of like this world controlled thing that you're never gonna see, but there's a glimpse of it in this world. Like, there's a reason that. So because of this thing that I've written about in this, this massive tome, or I have in this thing, that's the reason that all these signs are in red, and they use this phrase, or I know how pre-production works in this, and so that's why you hear this phrase repeatedly. Like, you could easily pick up, they could easily just publish this and be like, here's the rest of it, almost like the Silmarillion kind of thing, of like, here's the full history of the Middle Earth or whatever. Like, I know why these characters, with Tolkien, I know why these characters do these things, because I've got 4,000 years of history that tell me why they do these things. You don't really need to worry about it, but I know why. But with Lucas, it seems very much like he sort of sat there smoking some weed and was just like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to do this. I want to do that. And it comes together. It's one of those where you go like, just like, it's like this, just a gnat's wing away from being really interesting.
Yeah, there's a version of this, right? It's like there's a version of this. By the way, before we stop, you mentioned Planet of the Apes. What is with those like monkeys? Yeah, where did they come from? What
in the car park? They were added later on. That's a CGI, and this is something I want to sort of touch on before we go. Is, again, I don't know, like, I don't know where he was when he was making the CGI version. But he was like, oh, monkeys. Don't know.
Let's just add some monkeys, like jumping around and attacking people.
The only thing I could take from it was, right, and I'm going to add this in because this is the only thing that I thought of, and I compared it to the ending. Is the ending shot is him getting onto the surface world, right? And I don't know how far underground they are or whatever. Is this an indication that there is other animal life alive on this planet? That's the only thing I can take from it.
I thought about that, right? Like, okay. We don't see any dogs. We don't see, we see the little children in one scene. We don't see, Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's so bizarre. And it comes out of nowhere. Yeah. And again, it's just another thing where it's like you said, I mean, I don't know that Lucas was getting high, but I mean, it is that kind of like, dude, wouldn't it be awesome if there were monkeys? Spiders are cool. Let's put in some CGI spiders.
Yeah, I don't know. And that's the thing with this, and this is the last thing I want to sort of touch on very briefly before we finish up, is obviously, as we said, we watched the director's cut or the special edition, whatever you want to do. I Googled it. Unless you own this I think he did like 2005, I think he did it. So there are some DVDs kicking around of that original cut, all right? But they're quite rare and they're very expensive now. So you can only get this redo version. And he did it with Star Wars. He obviously did the special editions in the 90s and then redid them again in 2002, which is when he redid this one. What is it with George Lucas and just like eradicating his history? It's almost like he sort of looks back at this thing and he's almost. But what I find most bizarre is he goes back, adds all this special stuff in, and then doesn't answer certain questions that are like clearly sort of like an issue with the film. And you're like, you could have done this, this, and this.
Well, in the long run, I'll tell you what'll happen is that, I mean, right now it feels as if he's obliterating history because we don't have access to the earlier versions. Now, Star Wars, they apparently did say we're going to get. They gave people access to that. I mean, you can get DVDs that have the original cut. I mean, but THX is different. I mean, I'm sure that it's hard to find the original, version of Blade Runner. I mean, did they still put that out?
Yes, no, they did. There was a. So you can buy at the moment. You can buy either the final cut. I think it's called, isn't it? The final cut, which is. But there's a 7-disc box set that just has got all the editions on, all the variants on it. So you can buy that. I mean, it's not cheap, granted, but it's out there. Yeah.
But like what I'm going to suggest is that in the long run, it's like we have multiple versions of Frankenstein. We have multiple versions of a lot of classic novels, and some of those, in most cases, the author themselves went back and radically revised. And so there's a version that is generally preferred, but those versions exist and they're studied by scholars. And I think that's basically what's going to happen. When these things lose their copyright, then you can't prevent the other version.
Yeah. And there's a I mean, I don't know about for THX, but obviously for Star Wars, but I don't know many other directors that do this. I mean, I know that sort of James Cameron did it with Terminator 2 when he did the 4K restoration, but not to this level. Like he basically sort of like eradicated what's his name? Not Jason Patrick, but the T-1000's testicles at one point because they were in a shot that they weren't supposed to be. And he tidied up some explosions and some other bits, but other than that, he was like, I just 4K'd it, but never to this level. Like I just find it fascinating that George Lucas.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I feel like everybody kind of hates on Lucas for doing that. Look, I mean, I make comics. Every time that I actually with prose, usually I'm like, no, I have edited this so much that I, rarely want to touch anything when I'm doing, a new version or new edition. That's not usually the case. I mean, usually a lot of writers silently change stuff between new editions. But it's not the sort of Lucas stuff. But I mean, every time that I do a comic, I'm sort of slightly tweaking the colors in the background. I'm slightly,
there's slightly tweaking things, but then there's like, I mean, again, like there's a budget thing. I can understand if you want to change it for certain things, maybe, but there's a point at which you stop, don't you? You sort of go, I'm changing it and this, that. This just felt excessive. I mean, like, again, with Star Wars, it got a re-release, and I even liked some of the changes that were made for the special editions. Like, it tidies things up, it makes things neater. That some of the special effects are much better. But then adding things in is like, adding in like the Han and we'll talk about it maybe when we get.
Han doesn't shoot first.
Yeah, they change things like that, and
that's a big change.
Yeah, exactly. It changes things, and then he meets with Jabba the Hutt, and he steps on his tail, and all those sorts of things. Where you're like, you didn't need to add them back in. You didn't need to make that change.
But like the Jabba thing, I think is defensible because it's like that was part of the original vision. There's Jabba in the background. Like the problem is that it is not the same guy as in the Return of the Jedi, and there's no way of really squaring that circle. But I mean, like, at least there you can say, like, that was the original vision, rightly or wrongly. You don't have to like that, but, the director couldn't do it, and he wanted to, and they allude to it with dialogue. So, okay, I can see that. But why are you adding monkeys? Why are you, why, clearly, if your intention was always that Han shot second, why did you suck so bad at depicting that the first time through? I mean, there are things like that I know what you're saying. Ultimately, though, I mean, I think, we have all these director's cuts. We have, I mean, they're very common. And, and some of them are, I mean, I think there are 3 cuts of Alexander.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think is a very underrated film. Not a masterpiece, but a very underrated film. And
Ridley Scott's done it several times again. Sort of that was what was the medieval one when he goes to Jerusalem and with Orlando Bloom. Yeah, he does it a lot, and I know that sort of sometimes they're much better, but
and I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know. Can be a strange thing to have multiple versions, but
there's I suppose Ridley Scott and Blade Runner is probably the best comparison to this, because that got tweaked a number of times, and I do love that film. I think but this is where, like you say, if it's your baby, if like with Ridley Scott and that film, like it was clearly like a passion piece after a point, like an obsession almost. But THX1138 doesn't feel like that. It almost feels like well, I've done it with Star Wars, so I should really go and do this one as well, sort of like, and then he's gone a bit crazy with it. I don't know. It just feels, yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like, the strange thing is that I feel like with THX, there is the potential for a really interesting, good movie here, and I feel like if you're going to go back in and tweak stuff, I mean, not, and they did reshoot stuff. I mean, it wasn't all just CGI stuff. They did reshoot stuff, but not with the main characters, but it does seem like you could go even more crazy. And you could kind of flush this out and make this. I mean, I think that there's a version of this film that is really good, and I can see, I don't know, a Chris Nolan doing a brilliant.
Villeneuve. Give it to Denis Villeneuve. There you go. That's who I'd give it to. But I think one of the things I'd find interesting is, and we'll wrap up on this, because you're right. I think there's a great version of this movie. Like there's a potential. It's the potentiality of this film that I find fascinating, and it's because there's ideas here that I think could be expanded upon. And I wonder why there's not novels or comics or something else that just exist in this world that go, okay, well, we're going to actually like explore this in a wider thing. Like, I think, why do we have, again, like, in this world, like, we have Robert Duvall. You said that we don't know this is global, all right? So, but then we have Robert Duvall with an American accent and Donald Pleasance with an English accent. So, like, there's that crossbreeding. We've got the racial thing. We've got the sexual thing. Like, there's so much here that I'm surprised someone hasn't picked up and gone, I've got a novel to write in this place. Like, there's a follow-on, or there's another story to tell in this world. It almost feels like an untapped potential for all those different bits and pieces. So I find that kind of fascinating. Anyway.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, just as a quick note, the original film, when it was released, was in fact novelized by none less than Ben Bova, big sci-fi guy. And according to Wikipedia, it follows the plot closely. However, they do depict a new character, Control, who is in charge of the city, and you get to see his point of view. So you get to see, your complaint about not having like the people in charge, right? Then there are a few other changes with the mind lock and everything. You see LUH's trial and death, so that's not just off screen. And then finally at the end, THX climbs up and spends the night in the superstructure and exits in the morning and finds other humans are in fact alive outside. So you get more of an answer there.
This is why I love novelizations. Because I love the fact that, like, and some of that might have been in the original concept. Like, Lucas might have actually written a lot of that stuff. And then said, we haven't got the budget, or we haven't got the time, or I haven't got to do it. Put it into the novelization. Or Ben Bova's gone, this is missing all the things that we've talked about. I'm going to put them in, and no one can stop me. I'd be interested to know that. Yeah, that sounds like it could be quite interesting, actually. I mean, that maybe meets that potential that I think is there for this. That'd be quite interesting to find out. Anyway, we've hit our time for THX. The time of the budget is over tolerance, and we're now to leave this project.
We're at 6% over our allotted time. It ends right now.
That's right. Thank you. Bye. So, any final thoughts on THX1138?
I mean, I did. If you want a sleeping aid, that's also really interesting. I mean, that's a little unfair. I'm glad I finally got to see it. It is an interesting movie. I might rewatch it at some point. It's not horrible. Neither is it amazing. But it does have. I mean, there are some amazing shots. There are some cool ideas. It's not going to grab you though.
No, I'm very much the same. Like, I'm really glad I've watched this. It's one of those ones that sort of like I've known about for years. I've known the purpose of it, but but then it's like you say, it's not blown me away. And so I understand why this is an opening piece. It's his first feature-length film. He went on to do something else with American Graffiti and that. This has got interesting ideas. Some of it is clearly picked up and expanded upon in Star Wars, I think. But as you say, it's more of a completionist. If you want to go back and see like where this thing started, it's worth seeing. I'd recommend seeing it, but do not expect to be blown away or engaged a whole lot.
I do have one final thing I have to add. What is with the Buck Rogers footage at the beginning? Like, we all know that Star Wars was like inspired by the serials and stuff. I mean, what is with that?
No, that's a very good point, because I was expecting that to pay off in some way of being like, because it's Buck Rogers in the 25th century, and that was the thing. So that's the only connection I could make, is like, that's what we thought the 25th century was going to be. Here's what it really is. That's the only thing I could think of. Is like, we thought it was this big adventure, but it's not. It's the complete opposite.
It's the American introduction to Miracle Man, right?
Yeah,
hey, 1984 was going to be great,
Exactly. Yeah,
82.
that's the only thing I could think of, was like, this is meant to be a comparison piece, and you've got this idea of Buck Rogers versus THX, who's sort of like compliant and sort of stuff, but it doesn't really play out in any other part of the film. That's the only thing I could take from it.
Yeah, it kind of seems like, oh, that's fascinating. Why aren't we watching that?
I'm gonna go watch Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
Biddy. Yeah. So no, there is that. But yes. Anyway, so yeah, that's what I think. This is. It's worth seeing if you can get hold of it. But it's not compulsory, I think, to sort of for things. We've seen other films that are much better. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and you may do often watch THX. But let us know. Have you watched this? Have we got it wrong? Do you think there's a masterpiece here? As I saw in several reviews that described this as a masterpiece.
Really?
Let us know what you think. Is this George Lucas's hidden gem that we should all be sort of really talking about? Come find us on @PodTimeSpace on social media. Let us know. Or leave us a review. Tell us we're idiots. Go give us a 2-star review. Tell us we're idiots. I don't care. Let's engage with us. Let us know what you think. Preferably a 5-star review. We want to hear from you. We really do.
Yeah, because we're brilliant. I mean, we tell you what to think, and we're smarter than you, and that's why we do this. And so we tell you what to think. I think that's how we pitched this originally.
Exactly, that was it. It was just to sort of, we're influencers. We are going to be the sci-fi movie review podcast. But yeah, please leave us a review. Let us know what you think. And if you really enjoy what we're doing, go check out the Patreon. It covers both this and 20th Century Geek. That's patreon.com/20cg media. That's 20th Century Geek Media. And more than anything, not only will Julian and I tell you how to think about sci-fi movies, we're also going to tell you how to think about the Twilight Zone as well. We have Trekking Through the Twilight Zone, which each week we do a 15 to 20 minute episode on an episode of the Twilight Zone. We're now so we're getting to season 3. We've done the first 2 full seasons that are out there. Now you are going to be getting that interspersed with this. You will get some of the you're going to get the early ones, but that's only every other week, so you will never catch up to what's been done on the Patreon. There's hours of sort of like entertainment on there, and some fascinating episodes, because I'm the newbie and Julian's coming out really sort of from an experienced sort of like viewer. So go and check that out. And there's other stuff on there as well that's kind of cool.
I'm out.
But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. We greatly appreciate all our listeners, and we'll hope to see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.